Hey, Twisted listeners, I'm Cindy, and this is Twisted Listers, a podcast about murder and lists. And I'm coming to you solo while Diva enjoys her life a little bit this week, which we should all do. We all deserve. So hopefully you all are doing that as well. I decided to hold down the fort so we don't miss a week of storytelling. So I'm going to be coming out with a couple different episodes. This first one is completely out of left field. It has nothing to do with any of the topics that we've covered recently. It's just an interesting story, so I thought I would cover it. Really quickly, please like, rate, review, follow us on Instagram, join us on Patreon, check out the TikTok. We have a Discord server now that you all can join. Everything's linked on our Instagram. I should actually link to the Discord on our website as well, which I will hopefully do soon. But in the meantime, links to everything are on the Instagram. You can check us out there. It's just instagram.com/twistedlisterspcast. If you want to send us an email, twistedlisterspod@gmail.com, and our website is twistedlisterspod.com. Okay, nothing really to talk about. I'm not going to sit here and talk to myself. So I guess I'll just get into the case. I'm going to do the case of Diane and Joseph Pikul. Now, when I started reading about this, I was really excited because I thought they just had a really weird way of spelling the name Pickle. It's Pikul. And I was like, oh, that's definitely Pickle. And then I heard it all over the place. I watched, news stories on YouTube and whatever, and it's Pikul, which was a big disappointment. But anyway, I'm going to start by talking about Diane Whitmore. She was born in South Bend in 1943. She was born to a fairly well-to-do family. It's a very small town, South Bend. And she grew up with money, but she also moved around a bit. She moved, I forget where, she lived somewhere that she didn't like. And then by the time she was in high school, she ended up in New Jersey where she was like super happy. She did really well in school. Diane had always wanted to be a writer. When she was younger, she suffered from pretty bad asthma, so she wasn't able to do a lot of physical activity, and she spent a lot of time reading. And that really made her want to be a writer. She was super smart, really, outgoing, very driven. And, like I said, she came from a good family. So she had a lot going for her. And after high school, she attended college where she again excelled. And I believe that she graduated with a BA in journalism. From there, she moved around a little bit briefly, but she ended up in New York, which is where she had always wanted to go. Having lived in New Jersey, it makes sense. That would be the big city you want to go to. And she moved out there to get a job in journalism. And she became the assistant of an editor, I believe, that worked for Life magazine. So she got a job at Life magazine. And, it was really good for her. She wanted to be independent. She was working her way up in her, field. And I think it was really great that she was able to have roommates and live on her own in New York. Again, this was like the early 70s, maybe late 60s. And she had a good job and she was doing really well, but she had this weird track record with men. She just didn't make good dating choices. She kind of fell into the hippie movement. I know she traveled around for a while, with a band around the country, and she dated a lot of shitty dudes. Just to be plain about it, they all kind of fucking sucked. They were all kind of abusive. They were ne'er-do-wells. They didn't have jobs. Some of them sold drugs. They were all into hard partying. And I know Diane started getting really into drinking. I don't know how her drug use was, but I know the drinking became a daily thing. Now, she was still able to work. She still worked at Life magazine, and kind of the career side of her life was continuing to go well, but her personal life, for whatever reason, the decisions she made were usually bad, and it seemed to kind of be shitty for her. One thing I want to mention is that Diane was really, really beautiful. And again, we don't comment on that a lot on this podcast because we don't really think it's relevant. But I honestly believe that especially in the 60s and 70s and 80s, kind of before we started kind of pushing back on these notions, I believe that women who were very beautiful actually had a lot more issues with self-esteem. They were kind of objectified a lot more. I mean, we still are. Like, let's not pretend that's not still like a rampant issue. But I think back then it was like blatant and, people were unapologetic about it. So part of me thinks because she was so beautiful, she had security issues. Like she felt insecure and she, just didn't make great decisions with men as a result of that. So in 1975, she married a photojournalist who also worked at Life magazine, but it was a pretty rough marriage. They had had a rough relationship leading up to the marriage. And about a week or so after they got married, she opened his mail and he threatened to kill her. So she went and got an annulment. Her dad gave her money for it. And she went and got her own place, lived on her own. And the really nice thing about this was, again, she had her own job. She had her own income. She had a way of being independent. So even though she was making bad decisions with men, she was making good decisions with regards to ending the relationship. And she had a way in which to do that because she was independent. So she gets out of these bad relationships, but she still has this drinking problem. And she finally, in 1978, she's really down and out. She can't get control of her life. And she decides to join AA, Alcoholics Anonymous. And on one of her first meetings, she meets a man named Joseph Pikul. I wish it was Pickle. So this man is 9 years her senior. He was hardworking. So she was like, I believe 33 and he was 42, something like that. She was born in 1943. He was born in 1934. So right around there. Anyway, he was a hardworking man. He had a lot of ups and downs in his life, most of which were brought on, the ups and the downs, they were a direct result of his actions, which we'll talk about. So Joseph was born in 1934 into a very poor, very religious, and very abusive household. His father was a drinker and he was physically abusive. And I think that this left a really big chip on Joseph's shoulder. He always wanted to excel. He always wanted to succeed. It was like the most important thing in the world to him that he be financially successful. That he sort of do better than his parents. And not just that, but like do better than everyone. It became like he had to be the best and the most and make money and succeed. It was like an obsession and a need for him. And it also really negatively affected his life. And as you can imagine, his relationships. Beyond, needing to be this crazy overachiever, he was also super insecure. He had a lot of jealousy issues, which you can understand when you're raised in a situation like that, where you're treated like you're nothing. However, once you become an adult, it's your responsibility to handle that and not act poorly. And I'll just say right now that Joseph did not do that. So he worked really hard through, his young life. He went to like Northwestern, I think, University and, graduated. And then he went to Harvard. He paid his own way into a Harvard master's program. He left after about a year due to an illness. And at this point, he'd met a woman named Sandra and they got married. So they'd had a good relationship. He was very charming when you first met him. He would sweep women off their feet. He had a lot of charisma, which I think was part of how he was so successful later on in business. And it's also how he was able to sort of get these women to be with him, was this charisma, this love bombing kind of pulling them in. So they get married and they start a business together. And the business, so it's like a securities firm or some sort of analyst firm for like money, basically like money, marketing, money, whatever. I don't understand that shit. So they were handling like millions and millions and millions of dollars within a few years. And this was in like the mid to late 1960s. So that's like an unheard of amount of money to be in control of. And they're making a pretty good percentage on this. So they're making, six figures again, like in the 60s. So that's like making millions a year right now. It's very significant. They had a ton of money. Their business was super, super successful. But their marriage was not successful. Joe was a drunk. And when he drank, he was violent. He'd break things in the house. He would, threaten Sandra, threaten to kill her. He would follow her. He'd get angry if she was 10 minutes late coming home, like from the grocery store. So he was super controlling, super insecure, very, very scary. And meanwhile, they're buying vacation homes, like a summer home. They're, just presenting like this super successful couple. Uh, but it just got worse and worse. And finally, Sandra, who kind of had her own money because she was a partner in this business, she decided to, get away for a weekend. I think she was probably thinking about divorce. And she came home early from this weekend trip to find him in bed with another woman, like literally caught them in the act. And in response to her confronting him, he hit her over the head with a statue, giving her a concussion. So she tried to get like a restraining order. None of that would work, but she did get a divorce. And shortly thereafter, they closed their business because obviously they're not going to be business partners if she's like afraid to be around him. Joe lost everything at this point. Sandra continued on. She was not an alcoholic. She did not have these weird tendencies. She just kind of moved on with her life. Joe, on the other hand, started using drugs. He started using cocaine, methamphetamines. So he had the equivalent of like multiple millions of dollars. And by the mid 70s, he had blown it all. Everything closed. He wasn't working. And he was basically homeless. So in the mid 70s, he entered into Alcoholics Anonymous about 1976. And that brings us up to 1978 when Diane met Joe and they start dating. And Joe had been in the program long enough, but Diane hadn't. You're not supposed to start dating that early on. So that was the first red flag. The second red flag was that they started fighting basically immediately. But Diane, doesn't have a good track record of, for dating. She's always dating shitbags. And Joseph can probably sense when he's got a woman he can easily trap. So they continue dating, continue fighting. And within just a few months, Diane becomes pregnant. So now they're talking marriage and they get married. So they're married within before a year of dating goes by. These two have married and they've had a tumultuous relationship from the beginning. So not good, right? Not good. Joe at this time, like when they got together, he was doing well. He was making good money, but he wasn't super rich. But by the time they got married, he made enough money that Diane no longer had to work. Like she was working for the city at this point, and he told her he didn't want her to work anymore. And he told her dad that she didn't need to work anymore and that he would take care of her. So her dad loves this. Diane's like, cool, I'll raise the kid. But to her friends and to all of us listening and thinking about this right now, this is a huge red flag because this is the first step in him taking away her ability to get away from him. Her autonomy is gone. She no longer has her own income source, no money. So now she's relying on him entirely. So they get married. The whole time she's pregnant, he is convinced that she's cheating on him. He's screaming at her, threatening to lock her in the bathroom overnight. He's hitting her. They both leave Alcoholics Anonymous, which is a very bad sign, another major red flag. But on the outside, everything looks fine. Diane's close friends know what's going on. They're not happy about it, but just the way they present to the world at large is like this successful, happy family, baby on the way. And as I had said, Diane did grow up with money. So it makes sense that she would, marry rich. And I think that there's a lot out there that kind of paints her as like a gold digger or as somehow kind of deserving the treatment that she's receiving because she, trapped this man with a baby. And I just want to say that I don't really believe that after reading about this story. I think that she had a long history of dating abusive men, whether or not they were successful. And the fact that Joe became successful while they were dating when he had essentially been homeless just a few years before was kind of the luck of the draw. And I don't think necessarily that it had anything to do with her being with him. I think that she just had a tendency toward abusive men. I think that it worked out in his favor because he was able to get her to stop working and more effectively trap her. But I don't believe that she was gold digging. I really don't, because she had left men in the past. She wanted to be a writer. She wanted, to be successful. Her whole life, that's all she wanted. So I really don't believe that when I read that type of thing about her, I don't really believe it. And I just wanted to call that out. So again, Joe begins with this bullshit. The relationship follows the trajectory of his first marriage, like way too closely. He became more and more successful and more controlling and jealous. Like I said, he thought she was cheating on him the entire time that she was pregnant. He would monitor her every move. Like, you have to, if you've got, 30 minutes to go to the grocery store, like, if a man comes over to, like, say hello to you, he would, like, threaten to kill them. So he's, like, threatening her friends. He's threatening her. He's just completely isolating her. And he's not even, like, afraid to do it. He's, like, openly to her friends and family being, like, a fucking crazy menace. So at one point when Diane, I'm jumping ahead a bit. First of all, they buy a summer home in 1981 when their daughter's about 3 years old. And then in 1982, in early 1982, Diane again becomes pregnant and things go fucking crazy again. He is convinced she's cheating on him. And I've actually heard of this, like when women are pregnant, like their partners start thinking they're cheating on them. I really don't understand it. I don't understand the correlation or the connection between those two things, but I've definitely heard this like more than once. And I don't know. I don't know what that's about. So anyway, when Diane is 7 months pregnant, they get in a fight because they fight all the time, and he physically kicks her out of the car that they're driving in the middle of nowhere and fucking leaves her. And they reconciled like 4 days later after she checked into a hotel. But his 7 months pregnant wife just kicks her out and fucking drives away. I mean, this is the type of dude that we're dealing with. And of course they reconcile because, again, she's afraid he's going to kill her. And she doesn't have any money. She doesn't have anywhere to go. She's completely isolated. So they have their son, and life kind of continues. They get a nanny. She quits because of how crazy it is. They get another nanny. They later on, these women kind of discuss how fucked up their relationship was, how hard everything was, how scary everything was. But again, to the outside world, everything seems fine. And they're like this happy, successful couple. What Joseph didn't know, however, and what nobody knew, was just like Sandra, Diane was plotting her escape. And she started sort of toying with the idea, I think, to see how much she could get away with kind of under Joe's nose. The first thing she did was she said that she was going to start looking for a job. Like, it's 1985 at this point. They've got nannies. Their kids are like 3 and I think 6 or 7 years old. So she's thinking like, why don't I, get a job, have something to do with my time? Joseph gets so upset that he destroys her contact lenses so she can't fucking see, in a way to let her know that he's not okay with this. Rather than just talking to her, rather than having a rational conversation or being like, you're a full-grown adult who can make your own decisions, go ahead and do that, he destroys her fucking property. So that's the kind of piece of shit this motherfucker is, right? He's just goes straight to the violence, straight to the intimidation, straight to the jealousy. And so that doesn't go well. Even so, Diane does eventually get a job, but I think it's a bit closer to when they actually break up. Before this actual breakup occurs, in 1986, Diane is snooping through Joe's things, probably trying to find, like, is he cheating on me? Because I think he's gone long hours, he's erratic, there's all sorts of weird shit going on. And in his briefcase, I almost called it a suitcase, in his briefcase, she finds a pair of women's lingerie. Now, immediately, Diane thinks this is, belongs to somebody he's cheating on me with. But then she notices, like, these are huge. Like, these stockings are gigantic. Like, I can't imagine he's cheating on me with a woman who would fit into these. So apparently, where they lived, they had an attic. And as part of Joe's controlling behavior, he had sworn Diane, that made her swear, that she would never access the attic. She was not allowed in there. That was his private space. Well, after finding this lingerie, she goes up into the attic and she finds videotapes, photos, tons of women's lingerie, and these videos and photos show Joe wearing this lingerie. There's videos of him dancing sexy, touching himself, playing with himself, taking almost like bondage photos, but just by himself. And this is all stuff that he has up in the attic. So she thought he was cheating on her with other women. And in fact, he had like a whole secret life that he was keeping from her. Now, Diane, smart woman that she is, realizes that This secret, at least in Joe's mind, will destroy him. And again, we're in the mid 80s, so this is definitely the type of thing that would ruin somebody's life because, frankly, society kind of sucked back then. But also for a man like Joe, who's so concerned with the way that he's presented to the world, with being successful, with being in control, having her have this information about him was very, very scary to him and very, very effective for Diane in getting away from him and in kind of getting what she wanted, at least in theory. Because as you can guess, when a man like Joe Pikul gets threatened, he's already violent. He's already threatening murder. He's already kind of unafraid to just be a psycho. And he does not take well to this kind of Diane holding this information over his head. So at first she gets a job and she's back working in the world of publishing, but it's a pretty low level job, low paying. It's not really what she was hoping for. So in addition to working, which he is not super cool with, obviously, Diane moves out or tries to move out and decides that she's going to sue him for child support and alimony so that she can support her kids and maintain her lifestyle. Joe is not okay with this. There's no way he's going to let this woman tell him what to do or take his money or take his kids. I mean, you can imagine he probably doesn't actually give a shit, but it's the principle of the thing for a man like Joe. So Joe creates a plan to get control back. Now, Joe and Diane had like a summer home, same as he and Sandra had. And he says to her, okay, we're going to divorce. I'll give you what you want. Let's just meet up at this cabin, for the weekend with the kids. We can do kind of, excuse me, like a final family send-off kind of situation, right? A last hurrah, if you will. And Diane reluctantly agrees. And I think she agreed because he was being so nice and so charming, just like he knows how to be when he wants to get his way, when he's sorry and he wants to be let back in. And, he'd tried that. He'd tried buying her flowers. He'd tried apologizing. When that didn't work, this was kind of his last ditch effort to get her to reconcile. Or at least she thought. In reality, when Diane showed up at their cabin, the kids were not there. Only Joe was. And as she walked out of her car and toward the house, he attacked her, knocking her to the ground, and then he strangled her to death. From there, Joe disposed of her body and went along with life as though nothing had happened. Not exactly, actually. He started planting seeds with all of his friends and family about how she had become jealous and had left him, and how she'd probably run off with some other guy, how she was cheating on him, how, she disappeared on him. He called friends. He called this friend he hadn't talked to in like 9 years and was like his old roommate and was like, oh my God, she was cheating on me. She just took off. He called some of her friends and said the same thing. And then he just kind of went on with life. Like, oh, she left me. That's the end of it. Now, anybody who knew him knew that this was suspicious as fuck. And anybody who knew him knew that he wouldn't allow that. He would never allow her to just disappear. He'd never let her go to the fucking grocery store without there being an issue. So first, her friends reported her missing, and the police did not take this seriously. They're like, her husband has not reported her missing. Like, why should we believe you just because you haven't talked to her? Side note, it's fucking always the husband. There's a podcast called The Husband Did It because that's kind of the situation. And I know Diva and I did a whole, topic where the husband didn't do it. So, but for the purposes of this, I thought I'd mention that, like, saying the husband hasn't reported them missing or the wife hasn't reported them missing as a reason for not looking into it is dumb as fuck. Let's just be real. So after a few days of being harassed by her family and friends, Joe finally reports her missing. And as soon as he did, cops were like, you did it. Like, they immediately fucking knew that he did it. Within 5 days of her murder, he was arrested for her murder because friends and family and people started coming forward. They started looking into it first, obviously. At first, police were like, oh, she's just a rich housewife running away to punish her husband. But the more friends and family kind of said, hey, this is the situation. Here's what's been going on, with this couple. Cops had to pay attention. They had to be like, wow, he's been abusing her. He's threatened her. He broke her contacts. He controls her every move. He's threatened her friends. He threatened his last wife. He has, this long history of violence. And they finally took it seriously. And they especially took it seriously after he reported her missing, because then it was like, well, there's no argument. Like, she is missing. Now let's look into who we think did it. Part of this also involved reaching out to Joe's ex-wife, Sandra, who told them a pretty interesting tale, and I think really helped lead to his arrest, which he was arrested, like I said, October 29th. Now, when police first interviewed Sandra, she did kind of explain that he was abusive, why they broke up, that he was really scary. And most importantly, what she told police was that the night that Diane went missing, Joe showed up at her house asking her to bury something on her property. Now, she lived about 4 hours from New York, where the couple had been living, and she found this really, really interesting. Now, she told police she didn't know what it was he wanted to bury, and she told them that she told him no, but that was enough for them to at least arrest him and detain him and also subject him to a strip search. Now, during this strip search, Joe was found to be wearing women's lingerie. His secret was now out. It was definitely going to be reported. It was going to come up in trial. He kind of knew he was fucked. He then starts talking about how this was self-defense. He killed Diane. He had inadvertently, accidentally stabbed her after she'd come at him with a knife. But this pretty quickly fell apart, this story. So first we have the friends and family saying, Joe came to us and said, she was leaving him. She disappeared on him. The friend that he'd reached out to that he hadn't talked to in 9 years, that night before he had killed Diane, he asked the friend if he could watch the kids because they were arguing and she was leaving him. So he, ahead of time, found a place to put his kids, then after the fact made all of these excuses. Detectives also found out that he had gone to a hardware store where he purchased tape and rope. He made all of these calls, like I said. And then later, so police were like, okay, Sandra, thank you so much for this really kind of vague information. We don't fucking believe you. So they started pushing her, pressing her. And it turns out that Joe had confessed that he killed Diane to Sandra and asked her, please let me bury my dead wife's body on your property. Sandra did not let him, but she did suggest some other places that he could go. And to be clear, Diane's body was found in like a drainage ditch. Like a few weeks later, I think after he confessed, he kind of told him where she was. But Sandra did know that he was burying a body. She agreed to cooperate with the cops after she was granted immunity because she thought she could get in trouble just for not reporting it, which I think technically she could have. And it came up in his defense trial. Like his defense attorneys were like, you're an untrustworthy person. The fact that you wouldn't even say this to begin with, like you're lying, you're making it up, whatever. Right. So we have this hardware store visit. We have Diane's friends and family saying that she was always afraid he would kill her. We have, his ex-wife saying he straight up tried to bury the body. We have this friend he hadn't talked to in years watching his kids so he could go fucking kill Diane. We have all this shit, right? So Joe is arrested, but he's not guilty yet. And as a side effect, the kids, their children, are now in a custody battle between Joe and Diane's cousins. So Diane's cousins, the O'Gwins, wanted to take the children because obviously Joe is crazy and abusive and terrifying and a murderer. So they go to family court and the judge rules in Joe's favor and allows the kids to stay with him because he hasn't been convicted yet. What if he's an innocent man? It makes sense for the kids to stay with their father. Beyond this, he had also remarried a woman named Mary, and he had done this so that it would seem like they have a more stable family home life, and that even if he did get convicted, there would be a parent there to take care of them. So it was a very clever move on Joe's part to try and keep custody of the children. But it's very interesting how much he wanted to keep custody of them. And to me, it feels like just another element of his like need to control and his need to win, more than actually giving a shit about the children. And as for this Mary person, this new wife, she met Joe during like all of this mess, left her husband and her daughter, just fucking abandoned them so that she could be with Joe. Got divorced and married Joe in like a whirlwind hurricane kind of thing because Joe was desperate to put somebody in place so that he could win this, battle for his children. So this chick was just a fucking pawn. And she's also a complete asshole for ditching her fucking family to be with this piece of shit. So they are in this custody battle and Joe is winning. Like, as they haven't fully decided it, but as while it's happening, they're not with the cousins, they're with Joe and Mary. Finally, a state trooper from like upstate New York calls in to the O'Gwyn family lawyers and is like, "Hey, just so you know," and they tell him this story. So the lawyer, sorry guys, I don't know why my throat is like all raggedy today. So the O'Gwyn lawyer has Mary on the stand and they say to Mary, Mary, why don't you tell us about the fight that you and Joe had recently where you came home from the grocery store 30 minutes late and he attacked you with a knife, shredding your dress in 7 places in front of the children, and how you called the police and told them you were terrified. And Mary had to admit that that happened. And on the stand, she said, "I was overreacting. I'm not afraid of Joe." But the judge finally came to her fucking senses and was like, "That's horrifying. The children are going with the O'Gwyns." And just to kind of wrap that end of things up, the children were officially adopted by the O'Gwyns and were raised by them until they were adults. So now back to the trial. Joe, obviously, he's found guilty. I mean, he's as guilty as you could fucking be. And he's, arguing this, that, and the other. But he gets found guilty, but he's not sentenced. And, sentencing can like take a while. It's like, okay, you're found guilty. And then the slow hand of justice or whatever the fuck they say, it takes forever for anything, to happen. And wouldn't you know, while he is waiting to be sentenced, Joe Pikul dies. And it has been reported, we don't know for sure, but it was reported that he died from AIDS. Now, I don't know this. It's been definitively reported in some places and been reported as a rumor in others. It could definitely be anti-gay sentiment related to, wearing women's lingerie. It could have had nothing to do with having any sort of homosexual lifestyle, and it could have just happened because he was obviously, at points cheating with other women. I don't know, but I do know that he was only 54 years old. And as a result, his conviction was vacated after his death because he wasn't around. Even though he'd already been convicted, he died before sentencing. So he died officially like a free and clear man, which is so fucking fucked up to me. Like, I can't fucking, thanks. I hate it. Also, I did want to say that I got her date of death mixed up. So she was actually killed October 15th and he reported her missing like October 25th. So like 10 days later. So it did take a while for him to report her missing and was arrested like just a few days after that. The reason that I got it confused, I hate to say this, it's actually really sad. Her son, who went on to be raised by his aunt and uncle, like I said, their son Blake, he actually died October 24th, 2017. Now, I don't know how he died, but I do know that he was 34. He was, I believe, he was an Eagle Scout. He was in the Navy. He was a personal trainer. So he had a very good life. I don't know about his older sister. I hope her life was great. But it's really, really sad that he died unexpectedly. And I apologize for having those two dates mixed up. So she was, she went missing October 15th, was reported missing by friends just a few days later, was reported missing by Joseph, I think 10 days after her, after she actually went missing. And he was arrested October 29th. So 2 weeks basically to the day after he murdered her, he was arrested for it. Anyway, so that's the story. This man went to very far lengths to not be found out for the things that he likes to do in the privacy of his own home. But beyond that, he was just a murderous, abusive piece of trash. And the only sad part of this story, beyond, I mean, not the only sad part, it's a stupid thing to say. One of the many sad and frustrating parts is that officially he didn't die a murderer officially. I mean, hopefully in his head he did. And obviously in the public opinion he was. But he died, free and clear just because of the laws in New York. So pretty fucked up. All right, so that's story number 1 for this week. I'm going to pick another one for the remaining story number 2, and then Diva and I will both be back next week. I will also pick a topic for next week, so we'll have that on my next episode. And again, like, rate, review, share with your friends. Thanks everybody for listening. And until the next one, stay off our lists.